Poor little girl shows her TV to a disguised millionaire, not knowing it would change her life forever. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. David Harrison adjusted his worn baseball cap and checked his reflection in the cracked side mirror of the beat-up Honda Civic he'd borrowed from his company's motor pool. At 36, he'd built a business empire worth billions. But today, he looked like any other struggling resident of Riverside Heights, the city's most neglected neighborhood. His designer clothes had been replaced with faded jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt from a thrift store, his Rolex hidden away in favor of a cheap digital watch. The purpose of this disguise was simple: market research for his company's new affordable housing initiative. Harrison Industries was planning to revitalize this area, but David wanted to understand the real needs of the community, not the sanitized reports his executives presented in boardrooms. He'd grown tired of hearing about demographic targets and market penetration, when they were talking about families, children, real people with dreams and struggles. He needed to see life through the eyes of people who struggled every day, people whose reality was as foreign to him as another planet. David's own childhood had been one of privilege: private schools, summer camps in Europe, a trust fund that ensured he'd never worry about money. He'd built his empire through intelligence and determination, but he'd never experienced the kind of resourcefulness that poverty demanded. Walking through these streets, he was beginning to understand that there was a different kind of wealth here, one measured in community bonds, in small kindnesses, in the ability to find joy without spending a dollar. As he walked down Maple Street, David's trained eye took in every detail: cracked sidewalks, peeling paint on weathered houses, gardens where vegetables grew in old tires and milk jugs. This wasn't just poverty. This was resilience, creativity born from necessity. Children played in yards with toys that had clearly seen multiple owners, their laughter cutting through the weight of economic hardship that hung over the neighborhood like morning fog. He'd been walking for nearly an hour when he heard it, a small voice coming from behind a chain-link fence covered in morning glory vines. "No, Mama, I can watch this one. You said I could watch this one because I won't see food that I can't have." David stopped walking. The innocence in that voice, combined with the heartbreaking wisdom of those words, hit him like a physical blow. He found himself drawn to the source, his heart already beginning to crack in ways he didn't understand. Through a gap in the vines, he could see a small backyard where a little girl with dark curls sat cross-legged on a worn blanket. She was facing what appeared to be a cardboard box propped up on cinder blocks, painted to look like an old television set. The screen was actually a hole cut in the cardboard, and beyond it, David could see she was watching birds at a small feeder hung from a tree branch. The attention to detail in her makeshift television was remarkable. She'd even drawn buttons and a channel indicator on the side, and there was a small cardboard remote control lying beside her on the blanket. What struck David most profoundly was her complete absorption in the program. She wasn't pretending or playing make-believe in the way adults might expect from a child. She was genuinely engaged, occasionally tilting her head to follow the birds' movements, sometimes giggling at their antics. This wasn't a sad substitute for real entertainment. This was her choosing to find magic in the world around her. "Maya, sweetheart, I need to run to Mrs. Peterson's house to return her measuring cup," called a woman's voice from inside the modest house. "Can you stay here and keep watching your show?" "Yes, Mama," the little girl replied, her attention never wavering from her makeshift television. "The birds are doing a funny dance today. I think they're trying to tell jokes." David's throat tightened. This 7-year-old had created her own entertainment from cardboard and imagination because her family couldn't afford cable or maybe even a real television. But what destroyed him wasn't the poverty. It was the way she'd internalized the limitation, understanding that she couldn't watch shows that would remind her of food her family couldn't buy. A gate latch clicked, and a woman in her early 30s emerged from the house. She was thin but not frail, with the same dark curls as her daughter, and eyes that held both exhaustion and determination. She wore scrubs that had seen better days, suggesting she worked in healthcare, probably pulling long shifts to make ends meet. "Excuse me," David called softly, not wanting to startle her. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm new to the neighborhood, just walking around getting to know the area." The woman, Sarah, studied him with the careful assessment of someone who'd learned to be cautious but not closed off. Her hands showed the telltale signs of constant hand sanitizing and long hours, dry, slightly chapped but gentle. There was something in her posture that spoke of someone who'd learned to carry heavy loads, both literally and figuratively, but who hadn't let that burden crush her spirit. "It's okay. I'm Sarah Williams, and that's my daughter Maya." She gestured toward the backyard. "Are you looking for someone specific?" "I know most of the folks around here, at least the long-time residents." David sensed that Sarah was the kind of person who looked out for her neighbors, who probably knew which elderly residents needed help with groceries and which single parents might need a babysitter in an emergency. There was a warmth in her voice that suggested community meant something real to her, not just a word on a city planning document. "Actually, I'm just trying to understand the community better," David said, choosing his words carefully. "I'm hoping to get involved in some local initiatives. Maya seems to have quite an imagination with her." Television set up there. Sarah's expression softened, pride mixing with something that might have been embarrassment. "She's always been creative. We make do with what we have, and Maya has this wonderful ability to turn anything into an adventure." She paused, then added quietly, "She doesn't ask for much. She understands our situation better than most kids her age should have to." The weight of that statement settled in David's chest like a stone. A 7-year-old who understood poverty so well, she'd learned to police her own desires, protecting herself from wanting things she couldn't have. It was a survival mechanism that no child should need to develop. "Would it be okay if I introduced myself to Maya?" David asked. "I'd love to hear about her television shows." Sarah hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. There was something in this stranger's voice, a gentleness that didn't feel threatening. "Maya, there's someone here who'd like to meet you." Maya looked up from her cardboard television, and David found himself looking into the brightest, most curious brown eyes he'd ever seen. Her face was animated with the kind of pure joy that seemed impossible given her circumstances. "Hi there," David said, crouching down to her level. "I'm David. Your mum tells me you have a pretty special television here." Maya's smile could have powered the entire neighborhood. "It's the best TV ever. I get to watch the Bird Channel and sometimes the Squirrel Comedy Hour. And when Mrs. Peterson hangs her laundry, I get to watch the Dancing Clothes Show." She pointed excitedly at different areas of her yard, as if describing premium cable channels. "That sounds amazing," David said, and he meant it. "What's your favorite show?" "The Bird Channel," Maya said without hesitation. "Mama says I can watch this one because I won't see food that I can't have. The birds eat seeds and bugs, and I don't want to eat bugs anyway, so it makes me happy instead of sad." David's composure nearly cracked. This beautiful, intelligent child had learned to curate her own happiness, avoiding anything that might remind her of what she lacked. The sophistication of that emotional self-regulation was staggering and heartbreaking. "Maya has always been wise beyond her years," Sarah said softly, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "She finds wonder in everything. Last week she told me that dandelions were just stars that fell to earth and decided to stay yellow to make people smile." David looked between mother and daughter, seeing the fierce love that connected them and the quiet dignity with which they faced their challenges. This wasn't a family that complained or wallowed in self-pity. They'd created joy and meaning from whatever materials life had given them. But something else was happening to David, something he'd never experienced in all his years of corporate success and financial achievement. Sitting in this small backyard, watching a 7-year-old find magic in cardboard and bird feeders, he felt his heart breaking open in ways that would change everything. "Maya," he said carefully, "would you show me how your television works? I've never seen one quite like it." The little girl's face lit up as she scrambled to her feet, eager to share her creation. And as she began explaining the intricate rules and schedules of her imaginary channels, David realized that this chance encounter was about to become the most important moment of his life. Maya launched into an elaborate explanation of her television programming with the enthusiasm of a seasoned broadcaster. "You see, Mr. David, the bird channel starts at 7 in the morning when the robins wake up. They're like the morning news anchors, very serious and important. They hop around and look for worms, and I pretend they're telling everyone about the weather and what's happening in the neighborhood. Then around 9, the Cardinals come for the talk show segment. They're really good at conversations. They chirp back and forth like they're discussing important topics." She pointed to different areas of her viewing space with the precision of a television director. "The Blue Jays usually show up around 10. They're like the sports commentators because they're loud and they argue a lot about territory. And the Little Finches, they're the children's programming because they're small and cute, and they do acrobatic tricks on the feeder that make me laugh." David realized that Maya had created an entire television schedule complete with character development and storylines that she followed from day to day. This wasn't just imaginative play. This was sophisticated entertainment that she'd constructed entirely from observation and creativity. David found himself completely absorbed in her world. "And what happens in the afternoon?" "Oh, that's when the comedy shows start." Maya giggled, pointing to where 2 squirrels were chasing each other around a tree trunk. Nutkin and Fuzztail are the main characters. They're always getting into trouble trying to steal from the bird feeder. Yesterday, Nutkin fell right into Mrs. Peterson's flower pot and came out covered in dirt. It was so funny I laughed until my stomach hurt. Sarah watched this interaction with growing amazement. Most adults patronized Maya or dismissed her imaginative games, but this stranger was engaging with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions as if her cardboard television was the most fascinating thing he'd ever encountered. "The evening programs are the best, though," Maya continued, settling back onto her blanket and patting the ground beside her in invitation. "That's when the fireflies start their light show. Mama says they're dancing for their girlfriends, but I think they're putting on a concert for all the other bugs who can't make their own light." David accepted the invitation and sat beside her, struck by how natural it felt to see the world through her eyes. In boardrooms, he commanded respect through authority and financial power. Here, sitting on a worn blanket in a backyard that probably cost less than his monthly car payment, he felt more present and authentic than he had in years. "Maya, I have to go check on Mrs. Peterson," Sarah said, though she seemed reluctant to leave. There was something about this encounter that felt significant, though she couldn't quite identify what. "Will you be okay showing Mr. David your programs?" "Of course, Mama. We're just getting to the good part. The Jaybirds are about to start the drama show. They're always arguing about something." After Sarah left, Maya turned her full attention to David. "Mr. David, do you have a television at your house?" The question was innocent, but it cut deep. David thought about his penthouse apartment with its wall-mounted screens, streaming services, and premium cable packages he never had time to watch. "I do," he said carefully. but I don't think it's nearly as interesting as yours. Does your television show you food that you can't have? Maya asked with the directness that only children possess. David's breath caught. Sometimes, yes. Why do you ask? Maya's expression grew thoughtful, far too mature for her 7 years. Mama turns off the regular television when the food shows come on, or when there are commercials for restaurants. She says it's not good to want things that make your stomach hurt when you can't have them. But my bird channel is safe. They eat things I don't want anyway. The casual way she shared this information, as if it were perfectly normal for a child to understand such emotional self-protection, made David's chest tighten with rage, not at Maya or Sarah, but at a system that forced families to live with such careful limitations. "Maya, can I ask you something?" David said gently. "What do you and your mama do for fun together?" Maya's face brightened immediately. "Oh, we have lots of fun. On Friday nights, we have dance parties in the kitchen while Mama makes dinner. She plays music on her phone, and we pretend we're famous dancers. Sometimes we make up our own songs about our day, and Mama sings the verses about work while I sing the chorus about school. And on Saturdays, we go to the library for story time, and then we walk through the fancy neighborhood and make up stories about the people who live in the big houses. The library lady, Miss Rodriguez, she always saves the best picture books for me," Maya continued, her eyes sparkling with memory. "And sometimes she lets me help put the returned books back on the shelves. Mama says that helping at the library is like being a volunteer, which means you're making the world better just by being kind. After the library, we pack peanut butter sandwiches and walk through the fancy neighborhoods. Mama says it's free entertainment, and we get exercise too." "What kind of stories?" "Well," Maya said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "there's this huge house with a circular driveway, and Mama and I decided that a princess lives there. But she's sad because her castle is too big and she gets lonely, so we always wave when we walk by, in case she's watching from her window and needs to know that people care about her." David's heart clenched. Here was a child living in poverty, creating stories of compassion for people she imagined lived in wealth. The generosity of spirit was staggering. "And sometimes," Maya continued, "we pretend that we're secret agents on important missions. Like when we go to the grocery store, Mama gives me a list, and I have to find all the items on sale. It's like a treasure hunt. Last week, I found peanut butter for $2 less than the regular price, and Mama said I was the best agent ever." David realized that Sarah had turned necessity into games, transforming grocery shopping on a tight budget into adventures for her daughter. The creativity and love required for that kind of parenting was something no amount of money could buy. "Your mama sounds very special," David said. "She's the best mama in the whole world," Maya said with absolute certainty. "She works really hard at the hospital helping sick people get better. Sometimes she comes home so tired, she falls asleep on the couch, but she always wakes up when I want to show her something important on my television." "What's the most important thing you've ever shown her?" Maya considered this seriously. Last month, there was a mama bird teaching her babies how to fly. One of the babies was scared and kept going back to the nest. But the mama bird was so patient, and she kept showing him how safe it was. Finally, he flew all the way to the fence post, and the mama bird sang the happiest song ever. I called Mama to watch, and she said it reminded her of teaching me to ride my bike. The parallel wasn't lost on David. This child understood love, patience, and perseverance in ways that many adults never learned. She'd been taught these values not through wealth or privilege, but through the lived example of a mother who turned every challenge into a lesson in resilience and joy. "Maya, do you ever wish things were different?" David asked, then immediately regretted the question. He didn't want to plant seeds of dissatisfaction in this remarkable child. But Maya considered the question thoughtfully, without any trace of self-pity. "Sometimes I wish Mama didn't have to work so much, because I miss her when she's gone. And sometimes I wish we could go to the movies like other kids do. But Mama says that wishing for different things isn't as important as finding good things in what you already have. She says happiness isn't something you buy, it's something you build. David sat in stunned silence. This 7-year-old had just articulated a philosophy that had taken him decades to begin understanding, and she'd learned it from a mother who was raising her daughter to find wealth in the richness of their relationship rather than material possessions. As they sat together watching the birds, David found himself experiencing something he'd never felt before. The desire to be part of something real, something meaningful beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. Maya's innocent presence was forcing him to confront the emotional bankruptcy of his own life, despite his financial abundance. But what Maya didn't know, what neither she nor Sarah could possibly know, was that David's presence in their lives wasn't the accident it appeared to be. And the secret that had brought him to this neighborhood was about to collide with truths that would change all their lives forever. As Maya pointed out a particularly dramatic interaction between two cardinal birds, David realized that he was falling in love, not romantically, but with the idea of family, with the possibility of connection that transcended wealth and status. This little girl and her mother were about to teach him what it meant to be truly rich. But first, he had to figure out how to tell them who he really was. For the next week, David found himself returning to Maple Street every afternoon. He'd told Maya and Sarah that he worked odd jobs around the city, which wasn't technically a lie, since running a corporation was essentially an endless series of odd jobs, and they'd welcomed him into their simple routine with the kind of warmth that money couldn't manufacture. He'd begun to structure his entire day around these visits, moving meetings earlier and pushing conference calls later, just to preserve this sacred time in Maya's backyard. Each day brought new discoveries. He'd learned that Maya kept a notebook where she recorded the episodes she watched, complete with drawings of the birds and detailed descriptions of their performances. She'd learned that different birds had different personalities. The robins were reliable but predictable, the cardinals were dramatic and passionate, the blue jays were comedic troublemakers, and the small finches were the ensemble cast that tied everything together. David had also begun to understand the rhythm of their household. Sarah worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, often picking up extra hours on weekends to make ends meet. Maya attended the local elementary school, where she was apparently known for her creative writing assignments and her habit of befriending the children whom others ignored. Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor, had become an unofficial grandmother figure, watching Maya for the hour between when school ended and when Sarah returned from work. Today, Maya was particularly excited because she'd discovered what she called the soap opera channel on her cardboard television. A family of cats had taken up residence under Mrs. Peterson's porch, and their daily drama had become Maya's new obsession. "Mr. David, you have to see this," Maya called as he approached the backyard gate. "Whiskers, that's the daddy cat. He's been gone for 3 days. And Mittens, that's the mama cat. She's been crying for him, but today he came back and they're having a big reunion." David settled onto the blanket beside Maya, marveling at how this simple ritual had become the highlight of his days. In a week of sitting on this worn fabric, watching birds and cats through a cardboard frame, he'd felt more peace than in years of luxury vacations and exclusive experiences. "Where do you think Whiskers went?" David asked, genuinely invested in the feline drama. "I think he went to find a better home for his family," Maya said thoughtfully. "Sometimes daddies have to go away to make things better for their children. Mama explained that to me about my daddy. He went away to heaven to get things ready for us there someday. She said he didn't want to leave us, but sometimes grown-ups don't get to choose when they have to go. But he made sure we knew how much he loved us before he left." Maya's matter-of-fact acceptance of her father's death was both heartbreaking and inspiring. There was no bitterness in her voice, no anger at being left behind. Instead, there was a 7-year-old's pure faith in love that transcends physical presence. "Mama shows me pictures of him sometimes," Maya continued, "and she tells me that I have his eyes and his way of seeing good things in everything. She says that when I find something beautiful that other people might miss, like my bird television, that's my daddy's gift working through me. I like thinking that he's still helping me find good things, even if I can't see him anymore." David's chest tightened. Sarah had never mentioned Maya's father, and the casual way Maya referenced his death suggested it had happened when she was very young. This mother was raising her daughter alone, working in healthcare during what had been incredibly challenging years, and still managing to create a home filled with love and imagination. "Your mama is very strong," David said softly. "The strongest person I know," Maya agreed. "She cries sometimes at night when she thinks I'm asleep, but she always smiles in the morning. I leave her pictures under her door when I hear her crying. It's my secret way of sending her hugs through the wall." The image of this 7-year-old, developing her own system for comforting her grieving mother, nearly broke David's composure entirely. The love in this family was so pure, so selfless, that it made his own life feel hollow by comparison. "Maya, what would you wish for if you could have anything in the world?" David asked, then immediately worried he was crossing a line Sarah had carefully drawn around her daughter's expectations. But Maya considered the question with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "I would wish for Mama to not have to work on Sundays anymore. Sunday is supposed to be for families, but Mama has to work because the hospital needs her. I would wish for more time with Mama, and maybe for our television to be big enough for both of us to watch together without squishing." David's throat burned. This child, who could have wished for toys, games, her own room, or any of the material things she lacked, had wished for more time with her mother and a cardboard television big enough for two. Her desires were so modest, so focused on love rather than things, that David felt ashamed of every luxury he'd ever taken for granted. "Those sound like wonderful wishes," David managed. "What would you wish for, Mr. David?" Maya asked, turning her bright eyes toward him. The question caught him completely off guard. What could he say? That he wished he could take back 20 years of chasing wealth at the expense of relationships? That he wished he could go back and build a life that had room for love and family? That he wished he could give them everything they needed without disrupting the beautiful simplicity they'd created? "I think I would wish to understand what really makes people happy," David said finally. "I think I've been confused about that for a long time." Maya nodded sagely. "Mama says happiness is like a muscle. You have to exercise it every day or it gets weak. She says rich people sometimes forget to exercise their happiness because they think they can just buy a new one when theirs breaks." David stared at this 7-year-old who had just delivered a more insightful analysis of wealth and contentment than any business school professor had ever managed. The irony was devastating. He'd spent his life accumulating the means to buy happiness, while Maya and Sarah had been building it from scratch with nothing but love and imagination. "Your mama is very wise," David said. "She knows everything about everything," Maya agreed, "except she doesn't know that I know she goes to the food pantry. I saw her there once when I was walking home from school with my friend's mom. She was carrying out a box, and she looked embarrassed. But I don't think she should be embarrassed. She's just taking care of us the best way she knows how." David's hands clenched into fists. The idea of Sarah feeling shame for doing whatever it took to feed her daughter made him furious at a system that forced people to choose between pride and survival. But Maya's acceptance of their situation, her understanding that her mother's love was expressed through whatever means necessary, showed a maturity that most adults never achieved. "Maya, "You know your mama loves you very much, right?" David said. "More than all the stars in the sky," Maya quoted, clearly repeating something Sarah told her regularly. "She shows me every day. Love isn't just words, it's actions. Like how she always saves the best bite of whatever we're eating for me, or how she reads me extra stories when I have bad dreams, or how she lets me help her cook dinner even when I'm more hindrance than help." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah appeared in the back door, still wearing her scrubs from her shift at the hospital. She looked exhausted, but managed a genuine smile when she saw David and Maya on their blanket. "How were the programs today?" Sarah asked, settling beside them with the careful movements of someone whose feet hurt after 12 hours of standing. "Whiskers came home," Maya announced dramatically, "and Mr. David and I talked about wishes and happiness muscles." Sarah raised an eyebrow at David, who felt heat creep up his neck. "Happiness muscles?" "Maya was explaining your philosophy about happiness requiring daily exercise," David said. "She's quite the philosopher." She gets that from her father," Sarah said softly, then seemed to catch herself. "He always said that Maya was going to change the world someday, not because she was going to do something famous, but because she was going to touch people's lives and make them better." David studied Sarah's face, seeing grief that had softened into something like peaceful acceptance. "He sounds like he was a special man." He was. He died when Maya was 3. Cancer. But he loved hard and fast, and he made sure Maya knew that she was the best thing that ever happened to either of us. Sarah's voice was steady, but David could see the effort it took to maintain that composure. "I don't remember him very much," Maya said matter-of-factly, "but Mama tells me stories about him, and I have his laugh. Listen." She demonstrated a bright, infectious giggle that made both adults smile despite the heavy subject matter. David watched this mother and daughter navigate grief with grace, transforming loss into loving memory, and he felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This family had lost the most important person in their world and had chosen to honor that loss by building more love, not by becoming bitter or closed off. They had everything that mattered, and he had nothing that counted. As the evening shadows grew longer, David realized that his time here was about to become complicated. His corporate responsibilities were demanding his attention, and he couldn't maintain this disguise indefinitely. But more than that, his feelings for this family were becoming too deep to sustain without honesty. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to disappear from their lives or find a way to tell them the truth about who he really was. The thought of losing this newfound sense of purpose and connection terrified him more than any business crisis he'd ever faced. But the thought of deceiving them any longer was becoming equally unbearable. As he walked back to his car that evening, David caught sight of his reflection in a store window. The man looking back at him still wore the thrift store clothes and worn baseball cap, but something fundamental had changed in his eyes. There was a softness there that hadn't existed a week ago, a vulnerability that his boardroom persona had never allowed. He thought about his penthouse apartment waiting for him across the city, 30 floors above the ground, insulated from real life by wealth and privilege. Tonight, for the first time, that expensive isolation felt less like success and more like exile. Maya's cardboard television had shown him more authentic entertainment in a week than his wall of screens had provided in years. David pulled out his phone and scrolled through 17 missed calls from his assistant, 12 urgent emails marked priority, and a calendar reminder for a 7 a.m. meeting with potential investors. This was his real life, decisions worth millions of dollars, power that could change entire communities, responsibilities that affected thousands of employees and their families. But none of it felt as important as the promise he'd made to Maya to come back tomorrow and watch the season finale of what she'd dubbed the Great Backyard Drama Series. But as Maya snuggled against her mother and pointed out the beginning of the Firefly light show, David knew that whatever happened next, these two had already changed him forever. The question was whether he was brave enough to let that change transform his life completely. Looking at Maya's cardboard television, David realized that the most important show he'd ever watched wasn't playing on any screen. It was happening right here, in real time, in the space between a mother's love and a daughter's trust. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to be part of the story instead of just an observer. David's carefully constructed double life began to unravel on a Tuesday afternoon when his assistant, Rebecca, called him in a panic. "Mr. Harrison, I've been trying to reach you for hours. The Pemberton deal is falling apart, and they're demanding to meet with you personally by 5 o'clock, or they're walking away from the entire acquisition." David stood in Maya's backyard, watching her explain the dramatic conclusion of what she'd termed the squirrel soap opera, and felt his two worlds colliding with devastating force. The Pemberton acquisition was worth $300 million, and would secure Harrison Industries' expansion into sustainable housing. Ironically, the very initiative that had brought him to this neighborhood in the first place. "Rebecca, reschedule it for tomorrow morning," David said quietly, moving away from Maya so she wouldn't hear the corporate terminology. "Sir, with respect, you can't reschedule a $300 million deal because you're busy. Mr. Pemberton specifically said—" "I said tomorrow morning," David interrupted, ending the call. But as he turned back toward Maya, he saw Sarah standing at the back door, and the expression on her face told him that she'd heard enough to know something wasn't right. "Maya, sweetheart, why don't you show Mr. David the new bird family that moved in this morning?" Sarah said carefully. "I need to start dinner prep." Maya, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, launched into an excited description of a family of wrens that had discovered her bird feeder. But David couldn't focus on her words because he could feel Sarah's eyes on him, and he knew that his cover was beginning to slip. 20 minutes later, after Maya had exhausted her ornithological observations, Sarah called from the kitchen. "Mr. David, could you help me reach something from the top shelf?" David knew this wasn't really about reaching anything. In the small, tidy kitchen, Sarah turned to face him with the direct gaze of a healthcare professional who'd learned to recognize when people weren't telling the truth about their pain. "David," she said quietly, using his name without the formal Mr. for the first time. "I've been a nurse for 12 years. I've seen people from every walk of life, in every kind of crisis, and I know when someone is carrying a secret that's bigger than they are." David's throat felt tight. "Sarah, I'm not angry," she interrupted. "Maya adores you, and you've been nothing but kind to us. But that phone call, that wasn't a conversation someone has about odd jobs around the city. That was a business call involving more money than most people see in a lifetime." David looked out the kitchen window at Maya, who was now lying on her stomach, watching ants carry crumbs across the patio with the same focused attention she gave to her television programs. The thought of losing this, of losing her trust and Sarah's friendship, made his chest feel hollow. "You're right," David said finally. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Sarah leaned against the counter, arms crossed but not defensive, more like someone bracing herself for information she suspected would change everything. "Who are you really?" "My name is David Harrison. I own Harrison Industries, the company that's been buying property in this neighborhood for redevelopment." The words came out in a rush, and David watched Sarah's face carefully for her reaction. Sarah's face went pale, and she gripped the counter behind her. "Harrison Industries," she repeated slowly. "The same Harrison Industries from all those community meeting notices we've been getting?" Her voice grew sharper. "You're the CEO who's been sending us letters about neighborhood improvements and revitalization opportunities." David winced. Yes, but Sarah... So this whole time, while you were sitting in my backyard playing with my daughter, gaining our trust, you were planning to tear down our home. The hurt in her voice was devastating. No, David said firmly. Sarah, the development project started 18 months ago, long before I found you. I've been searching for you for 3 years, but you weren't in our initial property records because you're subletting from Mrs. Peterson. She owns this house. Your name wasn't on any of the documentation we had. Yes, David said. But Sarah, I need you to understand. I came here to learn about the community, to understand what people really needed. When I realized you were living here, when I saw that the project could hurt families like yours, everything changed. I never intended for this to become... He gestured helplessly toward the backyard, where Maya was now singing softly to the ants. You found us by accident, Sarah said, her voice hollow with realization. You weren't looking for us here specifically. You just happened to walk down the street where your brother's widow and daughter were living. The investigators had tracked you to this general area, David explained desperately. But with your married name and subletting arrangements and your work schedule at the hospital, finding the exact address took time. When I decided to do the community research myself, I thought I might spot you in the neighborhood. I never imagined I'd literally walk into your backyard. To become what? Sarah asked. To become the most important thing in my life, David said honestly. I've learned more about what matters in the past 2 weeks, sitting on that blanket with Maya, than I learned in 20 years of running a corporation. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. You're the billionaire developer who wants to tear down our neighborhood. I'm the man who fell in love with your family, David corrected, and who now understands that some things are worth more than any development project. Before Sarah could respond, Maya burst through the back door. Mama, Mr. David, the ants are having a parade, and I think they're celebrating something important. Come see. Sarah and David looked at each other over Maya's head, and David could see the conflict in Sarah's eyes. She was protective of her daughter, suspicious of his motives, but also trying to reconcile the kind stranger who'd spent hours watching cardboard television with the powerful businessman who could change their lives with a single decision. We'll be right there, sweetheart, Sarah said. Then to David, she added quietly, this conversation isn't over, but Maya doesn't need to be part of it right now. They followed Maya outside, where she'd arranged herself in front of her television to provide commentary on the ant migration. You see, they're all carrying white things. I think they're moving to a new house. It's like a moving day parade. David sat on the familiar blanket, but everything felt different now. The easy comfort of the past 2 weeks had been replaced by an awareness of how precarious this connection really was. Sarah knew who he was, and while she hadn't asked him to leave, he could feel the distance she was trying to maintain. Mr. David, Maya said, settling beside him, do you think the ants are scared about moving to a new place? Sometimes when families have to move, the children get worried about making new friends and finding new favorite spots. The question hit David like a physical blow. Maya was talking about ants, but her words carried the weight of every family in this neighborhood who would be affected by his development plans. Children who would have to leave familiar places, parents who would have to find new communities, elderly neighbors who would lose the support systems they'd spent decades building. I think the ants are probably a little scared, David said carefully. But I also think that if they're moving somewhere better, somewhere safer, they might be excited too. But what if they don't want to move? Maya asked. What if they like their old home and they want to stay with their neighbors? Sarah's sharp intake of breath told David that she understood the parallel Maya was unknowingly drawing. This 7-year-old was articulating the central ethical dilemma of urban development with more clarity than any city planning committee ever managed. That's a very good question, Maya, David said. I think the most important thing is to make sure the ants get to help decide where they want to go, and to make sure their new home is even better than their old one. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Like how Mama let me help choose our apartment when we moved here after Daddy died. She showed me 3 different places, and I picked this one because it had the best yard for watching birds, and because Mrs. Peterson seemed nice. David looked at Sarah, seeing new information in her eyes. They'd chosen this place deliberately, after loss, after difficult decisions. This wasn't just where they'd ended up. This was home they'd actively created in the aftermath of tragedy. As the afternoon wore on, David found himself cataloguing everything he would miss about these simple hours. Maya's running commentary on backyard wildlife, Sarah's quiet presence as she graded papers from her nursing classes, the way the light filtered through the tree branches to create patterns on the worn blanket. But he also found himself thinking about power and responsibility in ways he'd never considered before. He had the ability to transform this entire neighborhood, to bring in resources and opportunities that could change hundreds of lives. But he also had the power to destroy something precious, this sense of community, this network of relationships that had sustained families like Maya and Sarah through their darkest times. When it was time to leave, Maya hugged him goodbye with her usual enthusiasm, but Sarah walked him to the front gate with careful steps. "David," she said quietly, "I need time to think about this. Maya doesn't know who you are, and I need to figure out how to handle that. But I also need to understand what your plans really are for this neighborhood." "I understand," David said. "But Sarah, please know that meeting you and Maya has changed everything for me. Whatever happens with the development project, I won't let anything hurt your family." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "The problem with having that kind of power is that people expect you to use it. And the people who are counting on you to use it, your investors, your employees, your board of directors, they have families too." David drove home that night with Sarah's words echoing in his mind. She was right, of course. He'd built an empire that employed thousands of people, generated billions in economic activity, and funded charitable initiatives around the world. He couldn't simply walk away from those responsibilities because he'd fallen in love with one family. But as he sat in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by the trappings of success he'd thought mattered, David realized that for the first time in his life, he was going to have to choose between what was profitable and what was right. And Maya's innocent questions about the ants had made it clear that there might not be a way to do both. The next morning would bring decisions that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone in that small neighborhood where a 7-year-old had taught him to see magic in cardboard and bird feeders. David spent the night pacing his penthouse, trying to find a solution that would satisfy his board, protect Maya's neighborhood, and preserve the trust he'd built with this family that had become his heart. By dawn, he'd made a decision that would either be the most brilliant move of his career or the end of everything he'd worked to build. Instead of going to his office, David drove back to Maple Street. It was early, too early for his usual visit, but he needed to talk to Sarah before Maya woke up. He found her on the front porch with a cup of coffee, still in scrubs from a night shift that had apparently just ended. "I figured you'd be back," Sarah said without looking up. "I've been thinking all night, too." David sat on the porch steps, grateful that she hadn't sent him away. "Sarah, I have something to tell you, and I need you to hear all of it before you decide what to do with the information." She turned to face him, and David could see the exhaustion in her eyes, not just from the long shift, but from wrestling with the implications of his revelation. 3 years ago, David began, I received a letter that changed my life. It was from a lawyer handling the estate of a man named Marcus Williams. Sarah went very still. "That was my husband's name." I know. The letter said that Marcus had named me as the beneficiary of his life insurance policy, a policy worth $2 million. But I'd never heard of Marcus Williams, and I couldn't understand why a stranger would leave me anything. That's when I learned the truth that would send me searching for you. Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the porch boards. That's impossible. Marcus's life insurance went to Maya and me. That's how we've been surviving, the monthly payments from his policy. That's what I thought too, David continued. So I hired investigators to find out why Marcus Williams would leave money to David Harrison. What they found. David's voice broke slightly. Sarah, Marcus Williams was my half-brother. The investigators spent 3 years tracking down adoption records, birth certificates, and ultimately tracking you and Maya to this area. When my company's development project was approved for this neighborhood 8 months ago, I realized it was the perfect opportunity to finally find you while also learning about the community we were planning to change. The color drained from Sarah's face. No, that can't be right. Marcus never mentioned having a brother. He would have told me. Marcus was adopted when he was 3 years old, David said gently. His birth name was Marcus Harrison. Our father had an affair, and when the woman got pregnant, she left town. Marcus was placed for adoption with the Williams family. Our father never told me I had a brother. Sarah stared at him in shock, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in her mind. The investigators, what did they find? They found birth records, adoption papers, DNA evidence. Marcus had been searching for his biological family for years before he died. When he found out about me, he made me the beneficiary of a separate policy, one he'd bought specifically to provide for his biological family if something happened to him. But why didn't he contact you? Sarah whispered. David's throat tightened. According to his medical records, he was already sick when he found me. Terminal cancer, just like you said. He didn't want to disrupt my life with the news of his existence and his illness. So instead, he left me a letter to be delivered after his death, along with the insurance money and a request that I find his wife and daughter and make sure they were okay. Sarah buried her face in her hands. That sounds exactly like something Marcus would do. He was always taking care of other people, even when he was the one who needed help. Sarah, when I came to this neighborhood, it wasn't random market research. I've been looking for you and Maya for 3 years. I've been trying to figure out how to approach you, how to honor Marcus's request without disrupting your lives. You never expected to fall in love with us, Sarah finished. I never expected Maya to become the light of my life, David said. I never expected to understand what Marcus saw in you, why he fought so hard to stay alive for your family, and I never expected to realize that the money doesn't matter. What matters is that Maya knows she has family who loves her. Sarah looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Maya is your niece. Maya is my niece, David confirmed. And you're the sister-in-law I never got to meet, married to the brother I never got to know. They sat in silence for several minutes, processing the magnitude of this revelation. Finally, Sarah spoke. The development project, is this why you're really here? No, David said firmly. The development project was already in motion when I found you, but Sarah, I can stop it. I can redirect the company's resources somewhere else. This neighborhood doesn't have to change. But what about your responsibility to your investors? What about all the people who were counting on this project for jobs, for economic opportunity? David looked at her in amazement, even processing the shock of learning that her late husband had a billionaire brother. Sarah was thinking about the broader implications, the effect on other people. There are other neighborhoods that want development, David said, other communities that would welcome the investment. But I can't destroy the place where Marcus's daughter is building her life. The front door opened, and Maya appeared in pajamas covered with cartoon birds. rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama? Mr. David? Why are you sitting on the porch? Did something happen to my television?" Sarah and David looked at each other, both realizing that they now faced the delicate task of explaining to a 7-year-old that her family had just gotten considerably more complicated. "No, sweetheart, your television is fine," Sarah said, reaching for Maya and pulling her onto her lap. "Mr. David and I were just talking about some grown-up things." Maya studied both their faces with the perceptive gaze that had become so familiar to David. "You both look like you've been crying, but also like maybe you're happy. It's confusing." Maya," David said carefully, "how would you feel if I told you that your daddy had a brother that he never got to meet?" Maya's eyes widened. "Daddy had a brother? Like I could have had an uncle." "You do have an uncle," Sarah said softly. "Maya, Mr. David is Daddy's brother. Your daddy's name was Marcus Harrison before he was adopted and became Marcus Williams." Maya looked back and forth between them, processing this information with remarkable calm. "So, Mr. David is my uncle. My real uncle." "Your real uncle," David confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. Maya considered this for a moment, then broke into the brightest smile David had ever seen. "So that's why I liked you so much right away, and that's why you understood about my television. Daddy was always good at seeing special things that other people missed." She launched herself from Sarah's lap into David's arms, hugging him with the fierce intensity that only children can manage. "I always wanted an uncle, and now I have one. And he likes my television shows, and he knows about happiness muscles, and he understands about bird channels." David held his niece, and felt something in his chest that he'd never experienced before. This was what family felt like. This was what Marcus had been trying to give him, even from beyond the grave. But as Maya chattered excitedly about having an uncle, David caught Sarah's eye over her daughter's head. The joy on Maya's face was pure and uncomplicated, but the questions in Sarah's eyes were anything but simple. How do you build a relationship with a billionaire brother-in-law? How do you accept help without feeling like charity? How do you protect your child's innocent happiness while navigating the complex realities of vast wealth disparity? And most importantly, now that the truth was out, what happened next? David had found his family, but he was about to discover that love, even family love, was the easy part. The hard part was figuring out how to be worthy of it. 3 months later, Maya stood in the backyard of their new house, not far from their old one, but larger, with better plumbing, and a yard that had been specifically designed for optimal bird watching. Her cardboard television had been preserved and given a place of honor under a beautiful gazebo that David had built with his own hands, working alongside Maya to ensure every detail met her exacting standards for wildlife observation. "Uncle David," Maya called, "the morning news is starting, and I think the Robins have something important to announce." David emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee for himself and Sarah and a small cup of hot chocolate for Maya. This had become their morning ritual. Sarah worked fewer hours now, by choice rather than necessity, and David had restructured his entire business approach to prioritize family time over endless meetings. The Harrison Industries Affordable Housing Initiative had been relocated to a community 3 miles away, a neighborhood that had been devastated by factory closures and was eager for revitalization. The project there was actually more successful than the original plan would have been, because David had applied the lessons Maya had taught him about the importance of preserving community connections while building new opportunities. "What's the big news?" David asked, settling onto the blanket that was now a premium outdoor fabric rather than the worn cotton of the original, but which Maya had insisted must maintain the same size and color scheme. "I think Mrs. Robin and Mr. Robin are going to have babies," Maya announced. "They keep flying back and forth with little twigs and string and misses. Robin keeps checking the nest box you built. I bet we're going to have a baby bird episode soon." Sarah joined them, looking more rested and peaceful than David had seen in any of the photos from before Marcus's death. The life insurance money that Marcus had left specifically for David had been placed in a trust fund for Maya's education. But David's presence in their lives had brought something more valuable than financial security. It had brought the joy of extended family. "Uncle David," Maya said, snuggling against his side, "do you miss your old house? Your old life before you found us?" David considered the question seriously, as he'd learned to do with all of Maya's inquiries. "You know what, Maya? I thought I had a good life before, but I was confusing having lots of things with being happy. The things were easy to get. I just had to work hard and make money. But happiness, the real kind that comes from family and love, that was much harder to find." "But you found it," Maya said confidently, "and now we're all together like Daddy wanted." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, as they often did when Maya mentioned Marcus with such matter-of-fact acceptance of the family constellation he'd somehow orchestrated from beyond the grave. "Maya," David said, "I need to tell you something important. Do you remember when you told me about happiness being like a muscle that you have to exercise every day?" Maya nodded seriously. "Well, your mama and daddy taught you that, and you taught it to me, and now I want to teach it to other people. I'm starting a new kind of company, one that helps build communities where families can be happy together, not just places where they can live." "Like what you did for the neighborhood across town?" Maya asked. She'd been to the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Harrison Industries Community Center and had been fascinated by the playground, designed specifically to encourage children from different backgrounds to play together. "Exactly like that. And Maya, I want you to be my official consultant on what makes kids happy. Would you be interested in a job helping Uncle David design playgrounds and community centers?" Maya's eyes went wide. "I would get to help design playgrounds, with bird-watching spots and places for cardboard television viewing. If that's what you think would make kids happy, then absolutely." Sarah laughed, the sound carrying a joy that had been missing from this backyard for far too long. "I think you just created the world's youngest urban planning consultant." "The world's youngest urban planning consultant with the most important qualification," David corrected. "She understands that happiness isn't something you buy, it's something you build together." Maya jumped up and began pointing out all the features their own yard would need to serve as a prototype for her consulting work. A bird-watching station, a place for art projects, a reading nook, and, most importantly, a large enough space for multiple cardboard televisions so that friends could watch programs together. As she chatted excitedly about her plans, Sarah moved closer to David. "Marcus would be so proud," she said quietly, "not just of Maya, but of you. You found a way to honor his memory while building something completely new." "I found a way to honor his gift," David replied. "He gave me the most precious thing he had, his family. And in doing that, he taught me what family really means." David's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Board meeting, moved to 2 p.m. to accommodate your family time. The Pemberton project in the new location is ahead of schedule and under budget. Also, your request for a company-wide happiness consultant position has been approved. Everyone's excited to meet Maya." David showed the text to Sarah, who shook her head in amazement. "A year ago, I was a single mother working extra shifts just to pay rent. Now my daughter is about to become a business consultant and I'm married to." She paused, checking herself. "To what?" David asked gently. Sarah blushed. "I was going to say married to my brother-in-law, but that's not exactly accurate anymore, is it?" David's heart stopped. Over the past 3 months, as they'd navigated the complex process of becoming a family, his feelings for Sarah had evolved from dutiful care for his brother's widow to something much deeper and more complicated. But he'd been careful not to pressure her, not to assume that family affection could or should become something more. "Sarah," he said carefully, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Maya isn't the only one who's been falling in love with their uncle," Sarah said with a smile that was both shy and confident. "I'm saying that Marcus gave us to each other for reasons that go beyond duty or obligation. And I'm saying that last night, when Maya asked me if I thought Daddy would be happy about us being a real family with Uncle David, I realized that the answer is yes, and that I want that too." Before David could respond, Maya's voice cut through the morning air. "Uncle David, Aunt Sarah, come quick. The baby birds are hatching and it's the most beautiful thing ever." David and Sarah looked at each other, both laughing at Maya's unconscious use of Aunt Sarah, a title that was about to become much more significant than the 7-year-old realized. They joined Maya at the cardboard television, where she was providing hushed commentary on the emerging baby robins. "Look how tiny they are. And look how careful the mama and daddy birds are with them. They're going to be such a good family." David put his arm around Sarah and Maya, looking at the tiny birds, learning to exist in their new world, protected by parents who would teach them everything they needed to know about flying and finding food and building nests of their own someday. "You know what, Maya?" David said. "I think you're right. They're going to be an amazing family, just like we are." Maya looked up at him with eyes that held her father's wisdom and her mother's strength, and David realized that Marcus Williams had orchestrated the most successful business deal of all time. He'd invested his love in a way that would pay dividends for generations, bringing together people who needed each other and creating something more valuable than any amount of money could buy. As the morning sun filtered through the trees and the baby birds took their first tentative looks at the world, David finally understood what wealth really meant. It wasn't about what you accumulated, it was about what you gave away, what you built together, and the love that grew in the spaces between people who chose to care for each other. Maya's cardboard television had shown him the most important program of all, the live, unscripted, endlessly surprising show of a family choosing each other every single day. And David Harrison, billionaire CEO, had finally learned the most valuable lesson of his life from a 7-year-old girl who taught him that the best entertainment in the world was free. You just had to know how to look for it.